In today's video, we'll be going through 10 absolutely cringe stories found in the Bible. Welcome back to FTD Facts. I'm Sarah Carvalho, and now we all know the Bible can be a source of many good stories, but you can also find a lot of cringeworthy things in the Bible as well, which is why today we'll be exploring 10 absolutely cringe stories found in the Bible. All right, starting off at number 10, we've got to look at the story of Adam and Eve. God created the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve. In the middle of the garden, there was a single tree with fruit that was forbidden to them. Now, thanks to the crafty serpent, aka Satan, Eve and Adam were tricked into ignoring God's command. One of the consequences they faced was that they became instantly aware of their own nakedness. Imagine how uncomfortable you would feel if, after having lived in oblivious nudity without any feelings of shame, you took a bite of a contraband fruit and suddenly realized, like, oh crap, I'm naked and completely vulnerable to this other person. Meanwhile, with a growing feeling of shame about your own body, which was now exposed. Up next, we have the story of the talking donkey. King Balak of the Moabites worried about Israel's military advantage and requested Balaam's service, which basically consisted mainly of blessing and or cursing people depending on God's instructions. Balaam saddled up his donkey and hit the road toward the Moabite king. However, God became angry with Balaam for going and sent an angel with a sword to block his path. Upon seeing the angel, the donkey stopped immediately, but for some reason, Balaam couldn't see the angel and began beating the frightened donkey to keep it moving. That was until finally the donkey miraculously spoke words and told Balaam off. Balaam became even more embarrassed and repentant when the angel informed him that if it were not for the donkey, who stopped upon seeing him, Balaam would not be alive at this moment. All right, this next one is just cringe, even from the title, 100 foreskins. Before David became Israel's king, he had to put up with a rather jealous King Saul who hated him, especially after discovering that his daughter Michal was in love with David. Saul declared that if he wanted to marry Michal, David would need to bring him the foreskins of 100 Philistine enemy soldiers. King Saul did not expect David to survive, so when David returned with 200 foreskins, Saul was shocked and had to hand over his daughter. Now for me, how cringy is it though that the value of his daughter's hand in marriage was set at 100 foreskins? Just like, ew. And up next, we have the story of naked Noah. One night, after having too much to drink, Noah passed out drunk and completely naked in his tent. While unconscious, his son Ham walked in on him naked. So instead of honoring his father by covering him up, he went and joked about it to his brothers Shem and Japheth. They immediately walked backwards into Noah's tent to cover him up without observing his nakedness. Now, it must have been pretty embarrassing as a father to wake up and hear stories about your son having walked in on you completely naked, and then instead of respectfully covering you, joking about it to everyone else. Up at number 6, we have a story about forced honoring. As a high-ranking official, Haman was offended when a Jew named Mordecai refused to bow to him. To get revenge, Haman tried to convince the king to let him issue a decree that would legalize the termination of all Jews throughout the kingdom. I feel like that's quite a severe overreaction. What Haman didn't realize was that the Queen Esther happened to be a Jew, as well as Mordecai's cousin. In addition, Mordecai was directly responsible for exposing a plot to assassinate the king, so the king wanted to honor him. The king went to Haman for advice about how to honor a man who had pleased the king. Haman, stupidly assuming that he was the one to be honored, came up with a wonderful plan. The king loved the plan so much that he ordered Haman to carry it out, but in honor of Mordecai. Thus, an embarrassed Haman was forced to lead Mordecai, the man he despised, dressed in royal robes and mounted on a royal horse, through the city streets, announcing to everyone that the king approved of Mordecai. And at the halfway point in today's video, we have the story of Jesus' betrayer. Judas is famous for accepting payment to lead Jesus into enemy hands. Shockingly, his plot was brought to light by Jesus himself. After announcing to his disciples that a traitor was in their midst, Jesus exposed Judas's secret plans by stating that the one he hands a piece of bread to would betray him. Imagine how awkward Judas must have felt accepting the piece of bread from Jesus. Surprised by the whole situation, Judas left to, of course, fulfill the plan as Jesus said he would. Even more cringy, though, was the fact that Judas had the nerve to greet Jesus with a kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane just as he was betraying him. And moving on to God and Abram. When the Lord appeared to the 99-year-old Abram, he laid out the rules for confirming the covenant between them. In exchange for being the father of many nations, inheriting the land of Canaan, and becoming fruitful, Abram needed to do a couple of things. Number one, he had to walk blamelessly before the Lord. Number two, he had to change his name to Abraham instead of Abram. And number three, this is the kicker, he had to cut off his foreskin. Now, I'm sure that Abram probably wasn't shocked by the idea of changing his name or living an honest life, but undergoing a circumcision, that must have seemed like a pretty random request, not to mention how awkward it must have been for him to do at the age of 99. And up at number three, we have the story of the unfaithful woman. The prophet Hosea must have been shocked when God instructed him to marry a prostitute. And oh, by the way, she's gonna cheat on you too. Can you imagine how cringy it must have been to stand there and have to marry a street worker who you already knew was going to cheat on you? But he did it. And just as God said, after bearing 3 children to Hosea, his wife took another lover. In order to show how devoted he was to the people of Israel, God ordered Hosea to show unconditional love to his wife by buying her back from the man she'd been sleeping with. In a way, this is a story of forgiveness, but at the same time, it would also be pretty awkward paying someone to give you back your own wife. Our next story is that of deceiving Jacob. Laban had 2 daughters named Leah and Rachel. Rachel's beauty captivated his nephew Jacob. Now, in order to win Rachel as his wife, Jacob promised to become Laban's employee, or basically a slave, for 7 years. But when the wedding day finally arrived, the devious Laban, in an attempt to marry off his oldest daughter first, dressed up Leah as Jacob's bride instead of Rachel. So you must be wondering, how did he not notice? Well, the veiled wedding outfit combined with the darkness of the marriage chamber prevented Jacob from noticing a problem until the next morning. Now, how cringy would it be to wake up thinking you're lying next to the love of your life, who you slaved away for 7 years, only to find out that you had been tricked? Even more insane is that Jacob worked another 7 years for Laban just to finally be able to marry Rachel as well. Now, man, that is commitment and love. All right, and all the way down to number 1, we have the story of Lot's daughters. This is probably the most cringy to me. All right, so after fleeing from the smoldering wasteland that had been Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his daughters settled in a deserted mountainous region. His 2 daughters, believing that most of the world had been destroyed by fire and brimstone, concluded that in order for them to preserve their family line, they would have to get their father drunk and then, well, spend the night with him. I know. So for 2 consecutive nights, 1 night for each daughter, they managed to get their father so completely smashed that he apparently wasn't aware of what was happening. Now, what I'm wondering, would this situation have been more awkward for the daughters or for Lot, especially when he realized what had happened and that both daughters were pregnant with his children? I mean, it's like, hey children, meet your father, also your grandfather. Major cringe factor here, my friends. All right, everybody, that brings us to the end of today's video on 10 absolute cringe stories found in the Bible. Let me know in the comments below which of these cringeworthy stories was the most shocking for you. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you here next time for more facts. See ya.